Right, hello, welcome to the Sisyphus Complex Solution. This is episode 183 called Steel Works. It is going to probably be a bit of a longer episode this week based on the notes that I've got, so I suppose I'll just get straight into it, which I'm slightly on a different beginning to normal because, and sort of bear with me a little bit in that there is method to my madness insofar as what I'm going to be doing and talking about. Because I'm going to start off by talking about something which is slightly off subject to begin with. So if there's anybody out there that isn't aware from past videos and so forth, you may not know that in a past life I used to be a watchmaker many moons ago, and over the past couple of weeks I've been doing some repairs to a couple of my own watches, and nothing overly complicated because I got rid of my toolkit and things like that a long time ago as well, or most of the toolkit I should say. But all I basically wanted to do was change one leather strap on one watch, but then change from a bracelet to a leather strap on another one. Fairly straightforward piece of work, you'd imagine. Now, the issue that I came across was that with the bracelet itself, which is the style of bracelet that you can see here, this type, the original clasp that I had basically looks like this flat version when I first bought it in 1992, but I really didn't like that. It was quite a boring looking clasp as far as I was concerned. And so once I'd sort of taken ownership of the watch, I decided to change it for a more classic version, which is this one that you can see here, this type of version. And you can actually also see it on the actual thing itself. I don't know if you can see that properly, but anyway, just from the picture alone you can see. That particular style of clasp comes from the 1960s. So like I say, it's a little bit more ornate, and I preferred it that way. Now, it lasted exceptionally well. Like I say, I bought the watch in 1992, not 62. And the clasp was from the 1960s. So the fact that we're here in 2025 and that's it, it did really well. But a little bit earlier on this year, it finally gave out and broke. Now, I did consider buying a new clasp, which just for the clasp by itself, without them asking anybody to do the work for me, just buying the clasp itself would have cost £150, which, yeah, fair enough, but it would again been one of these flat versions, which I really just don't like. I find them very boring. And if it had been even one of the more modern versions, and I don't like the modern versions of Rolex watches. And after a while, I just thought, no, I don't want to do that. So what I will do is put a leather strap on instead. I'll have to be careful how you're going to interpret that. Put a leather strap on. Put a leather strap onto the watch, not on my didgeridoo. Anyway, obviously with this kind of watch, you don't really want to be damaging it by having sort of using implements that are not exactly supposed to be used for the job. It all becomes a little bit pedantic for anybody that's not familiar with this kind of stuff and that, but trust me, you don't want to be messing up your watch by trying to remove things with a drawing pin or the safety pin and things like that. But obviously in that, as I'm getting a little bit older and that, I tend to struggle a little bit with my eyesight as well. So what I've ended up having to do is I've got myself a set of what are called loops. I always knew it in Japanese and that, so it was a kizumi. And basically in that I end up having to use something that is what's like a times 10 now. So you basically just put that in your eye so you can actually see things close up and understand what it is that you're actually doing. Historically, I used to use a times 5, but now I have to use a times 10. Yeah, no biggie. But then I also bought a spring bar tool. Now, the thing is, this is where the issue started to begin and how it kind of shaped what has ended up being this week's episode. So if there's anybody out there at all now that does understand anything about watchmaking and the tools that are used, you know that there's a particular brand called Berger, which is the top of the range really, and that the most reliable tools that you can use for watchmaking. And so this is the particular tool that I bought. Got it right here. Now, just as one particular little bit of a side note, and that which again does end up being a little bit relevant in that, but I did find out afterwards that they also sell this particular version of the same tool. In hindsight, I would have probably bought one of them simply due to the addition of or the innovation, shall we say, of having the measurements in there. And it's just something that's a nice addition, that for being able to measure the width of the spring bars and lugs. And so, yeah, I just thought I'd make that little additional note and that, just in case there's anybody else out there and that goes to buy this sort of stuff. So the point of actually having this tool is so that you can literally use it to insert here into this hole here. Then that will push the spring bar down, and then you can release the flush fit, or what's called a flush fit. That'll then help you to obviously take off the bracelet or even take off the leather strap. So in normal circumstances, this is actually not a particularly difficult job to do. But from time to time, and the reason why it's better to have a proper tool for this sort of thing, is that sometimes, especially with age, the spring bar can be a little bit stiff, and you want to make sure that you've got a decent sturdy tool to be able to do the job. So the thing about that then is that the tool that you've purchased, which is the top brand for this specific task, you're expecting to see something which is a quality product and able to cope with any slightly stiff spring. That turned out to be a little bit of the case with my watch, and the reason for that obviously, and that is, like I say, that particular watch was bought in 1992. I do have another one in that which is from the 1950s, which is this one. That one ended up being a really quite simple, straightforward change of leather strap. So the thing about this is that when you have a brand like this that everybody knows and understands is the brand, the one that you go to in able to do this kind of job, it's the first tool that you go to purchase, you're expecting the quality to be there. I do know just from the watches themselves that, like I say, for example, going back to this one, the movement inside this 1950s watch is a better quality material that is used to make the movement than the watch that I've got that I bought in 1992, which is this one. So you can see that I do actually have the leather strap on there now. So it goes with a lot of these types of things. I mean, the even more modern Rolex watches are actually just far too blingy. The material, I don't like the steel that they use. I probably don't even like the gold that they use. I just don't like the modern Rolex watches. So because it had been the work that I used to do back in those days, it became immediately notable to me that once I started to use this particular tool, it had started to bend. So it's, well, you're not really going to be able to see it on the camera here and that, but basically you've got the slim end that is going to go into the lug, and it was immediately starting to bend over. Now, I know from having these tools in the past that would never have happened. And so as I started to notice that, I then got to repair the tool before I could even start do the work in terms of releasing the bracelet. So I'm starting to get really quite bloody annoyed with that sort of thing, because they're not exactly what you call cheap. Now, that made me give some consideration as to what the hell might have been going on with this particular Bergen brand. And the first thing that I did was take a look and see what they're up to these days. And I did notice that they've now got a relationship with China. They have an office based out in Hong Kong, which now is obviously, it's China. So essentially, this made me start to ask a couple of questions. Because a great deal of the economy and a great deal of the conversation around the economy is focused on innovation. And then when most people talk about innovation, they're predominantly talking about the tech industry. And you know, that you get that, oh, it's all about the AI, it's all about the algorithm, it's all about software. But in doing this, too many people are forgetting some of the most important fundamental products that are required to run an economy. And some of the opportunities that might be out there in terms of being able to maintain quality goods. And it occurs to me that certain tools that may not, but necessarily, you don't have to be, sort of reinventing the wheel with this sort of stuff. But if you notice that the market leader is producing an inferior quality product, then that means that opportunity is arising for you to be able to step in to their shoes. Now, in terms of Bergen themselves, we're not talking about some kind of massive organisation here. I mean, they've been around since the mid 1800s, so like 1751, something like that. And it's a company that only has like a revenue generating operation of around about 20 million per annum. But if you consider that this is a relatively small market, and steel is absolutely a key to these kinds of products, you can then sort of widen out your vision a little bit in that and understand that there's a whole range of products that are not necessarily based off of something as quite as niche as this, but going right the way through to critical infrastructure components, where being a leader in quality is far, far more important than whether you can program some poxy bloody algorithm. Because again, a lot of people do tend to forget that in order for you to have a lot of your technology, you do need an awful lot of these fundamental products, quality steel being one of them. So obviously, like I said, you can turn around and say, well, look, this example that has made you go in this direction, you're talking about a watch which is a luxury item. It's not exactly high on the scale of importance in the world. But that would be a limited knowledge problem, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to be starting to sort of bring this forward into one of the organisations that is listed under the MOD, that originally it had been much further down the list that I would have been doing later on, but I've decided to bring it into this episode simply because of this situation that I came across where, like I say, it's a matter of understanding the wider picture here and that, because yes, once upon a time I used to be a watchmaker and that, but I've also, up until something like around about May of last year, I was also involved with the steel wire rope industry. So I do have an understanding as to the wider implications of this kind of market. And so what I thought I'd do is bring this particular organisation listed under the MOD forward, specifically because of this type of situation and what it does actually mean. So the first thing to clarify is that it was in July of 2021 that the MOD bought Sheffield Forge Masters for £2.56 million. Unusually, this comes within a commitment to spend 400 million over 10 years, where the emphasis is the cost of a new forge line. This is an important part that I'll come back to, but just anybody that has had any involvement, as I've had involvement, the number of sectors and parts of sectors that I've had involvement with over the years, and that is actually quite wide. And what I would say directly is anybody that's also been involved in mergers and acquisitions, if you're buying something for 2.56 million and then you're going to have to invest 400 million, there's not many people that would do that, put it that way. So, but like I said, I'll kind of come back to that shortly. So, as a first step, the one thing to understand about this is that this is evidence of a steel forge fitting quite nicely into the element that I keep having to repeat, that government is increasingly shifting from command and control economy to controlling the means of production within a critical sector. This is something that we really do need to start comprehending. So then, in terms of the position of Sheffield Forge Masters, since it has been in the hands of the MOD, we've only got 3 reporting periods to give us an idea as to what the organisation looks like under the MOD, though obviously that does mean that I won't be including these figures in the benchmark period. It is, as you'd expect, a loss-making entity, and you know that isn't a surprise. Otherwise, it wouldn't have fallen in the hands of the MOD in the first place. And whilst they are reducing the losses very, very slowly, they are also reducing the operating costs, and we can also see that the cost of employment is heading in the wrong direction. So there's still issues in terms of what we can see during these first few years. As a point of interest for people here, and that we're looking at an organisation that creates revenue of around 100 million. Now, here is where I have to remind people once again of something else that I've mentioned a number of times before, but it does need to be stated again. What we have is an organisation that is operating in and being influenced by the Mission Possible Partnership. Now, this Mission Possible Partnership is the lunatic climate cult and its plans to destroy industry whilst pretending that they know what they're talking about and what they're doing. In this particular element that I've got on the screen here, this is their focus on how they're going to replicate Mao's idiocy and their claim of how they know anything about steel production and how it's all going to be changed according to their great leap forward plan. Obviously though, when you see things like this is how they're going to change the steel forging industry and so forth, It then allows you to be able to click on that particular link to see their plan. And obviously when you do that, you find out that you are getting straightforward sent over to the bloody World Economic Forum, of course. I had pointed it out before, it needs understanding again. The steel industry is being messed around with under the instruction of the World Economic Forum. Their genius plan is to replace coal-fired furnaces and then gas-fired forges with hydrogen, because they're retarded. These are people that don't know anything about anything. They're also promoting recycled steel, which goes beyond retarded. Essentially what you're talking about here now, because these are things that are very, very well known to be retarded, and so you can only realistically look at this as something that has drifted actually beyond being retarded and gone directly straight full on into malicious intent. Because this level of malicious intent is actually going to kill people. And I am not talking in hyperbole here. Now, Sheffield Forgemasters is currently gas-fired, which I don't think is entirely optimal, just from a cost perspective. I think coal would be preferable to that. But I mean, I can understand why they stick with gas. That's fine. But the introduction of hydrogen is well known to be such a stupid idea, because it causes what is called embrittlement. Therefore, you have a loss of integrity to the steel. In simple terms, what that means is it makes the steel weak and very much increases the likelihood that your steel is going to break. So, has the MOD been influenced by this? And is it going to have any impact to Sheffield Forgemasters? This is the executive summary from something called Project HIDES. And guess what they're going to be doing at Sheffield Forgemasters? And this is separate to this 400 million, because this is all being funded through the, or what was called the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department. This is an utter farce. Now also understand, we're talking about steel that is being focused toward an already destined command and control socialist aim of developing the military, because that's what they always end up doing. You know, this is the ideology that is so good that it has to be forced on everyone. In this particular element of regurgitating Mao's utter stupidity of forcing the production of what is known as pig iron, link in the description as to how this idiot 5-year plan of Mao led to the deaths of millions. The only factor these modern morons are considering is emissions. That is the be and end all as to why they're doing this. And as I keep explaining numerous times again, that means they are basing everything off of a falsehood. There are certain fundamentals that you should actually be taken into consideration, which is mentioned absolutely nowhere amongst this retarded push. And the reason why that then becomes an error is because this is just a small part, I mean a really small part, as the kind of numbers and the kind of areas of consideration and competency that should be uppermost in the minds, and would be uppermost in the minds, of people that are competent in steel production. You want to understand the quality of your steel. I would imagine there's probably quite a few people that are working out at Sheffield that are competent in their job, that are literally pulling their hair out at what the hell is about to take place. You need to understand the tensile strength, you understand the hardness, and you understand the temperature limitations. You check the quality of your steel. What you don't do is put it in a situation where you're going to make it brittle, which hydrogen does by default. Link in the description that tells you this. Even within that, you have additional grades that make the steel specific to purpose. Although I did start off this episode with my complaint about the lack of strength in the spring bar removal tool. That kind of thing is something that makes me think, well, there's an opportunity in terms of having the quality to be able to replace a long-standing brand, but do something from the UK. When I have a problem with this tool and that I then end up having to repair this tool, the consequences aren't really severe. When you're talking about something that is the types of component parts that are being built in Sheffield Forge Masters, you're talking immense consequences. Like I said, this is where you're talking about the problem of people get killed with this sort of problem. If you put it to a wider industry, because they are trying to do this across industry, so not just within Sheffield Forge Masters, imagine that you have the kind of consequences from weakened steel beams that hold up buildings or bridges. You then have additional considerations, because as much as this is a forge, then you have to also consider the wider steel production side of things as well. That then takes you into additional applications. So you're talking about making of steel rods, rebar, then the likes of the work that I was involved with before, the wire rope. And I know from working in that sector, like I said, for about 5 years, how shit steel wire rope can literally result in a cable car falling from the sky, because it will snap. I can't emphasize enough how important this is, and it's far more important than whether you're going to be aiming your entire change of business based around the falsehood of my climate. The world is not going to end because climate bullshit, but you certainly will make it look like it's going to end if you do stupid shit like fucking up your steel industry, because everything will fall apart. There is a source that I'll refer to again, because Chinese steel is a good example of what can happen when you use badly produced steel. So let me just give you a little bit of a taste as to what can happen.
A Bangkok skyscraper collapsed, not from an earthquake nearby, but from steel that never should have been used. On March 28, 2025, a massive 7.7 quake hit Myanmar. Bangkok, over 1,000 kilometers away, felt only mild shaking, but that was enough. A 33-story building under construction crumbled, killing over 60 workers. Investigators found the real culprit: cheap, faulty steel from a blacklisted Chinese supplier, banned just months earlier. Bad materials, bad design, a tragedy waiting to happen, triggered by a quake hundreds of miles away.
Do you get the idea? If you think that that's just some sort of random freak incident and that it won't happen here, I would suggest you really start to think again. It's worse than that though, and if you read this additional comment from the WEF-based propaganda, because this weakened steel is going to cost between 20 to 50% more than high-grade reliable steel. The Chinese stuff is cheap shit that's been dumped. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But this idiocy is going to make it even more uncompetitive and more dangerous. And how they intend to deal with this is the same as they always do, and they're just talking about creating an artificial market, just like they did or are continuing to do with energy costs, because they're going to put carbon taxes into play. They will put carbon taxes on your cheap shit Chinese steel, possibly. Well, there's areas around that are very questionable. But they'll put a carbon tax on actual high-grade products to put them on a par with the brittle shit that they want people to be producing. What that means is they're going to inflate the price of everything else so that it makes it look like there's some sort of parity there. Just driving up inflation on everything. This is one of the main tools that is far too often used, abused, and too many people don't seem to get it through their heads as to what an artificial market actually is. And this false impression that, the renewables are getting cheaper. No, they're not. You're just driving up the cost of oil and gas to make it look like there's some sort of parity there. It's an utter lie. They try to work this in such a way to make it look like their shit being cheaper. Their crap, rubbish, idiot, useless products. And that everybody's suddenly got to go and use that. Because the good stuff has been inflated and barriers put in place in order for that to make it almost impossible for you to get it. Pay considerably more, get inferior and dangerous products. That's what this is all about. So they're not only pushing their favoured poor products into the market, but as I say, they are placing barriers onto the possible route of competition and quality. Again, I know from my own experience of working in this sector that both the buy side and the distribution side are far too largely engrossed in this fraud as well, because they only ever look at the purchase cost. They never actually give a damn about the consequences of the product and the liability that's involved. And so they sure as hell don't care about lifetime costs, because the better quality product that you have, the longer it lasts. So that initial reduced price isn't such a key factor when you understand that your lifetime of a higher quality product will mean that it ends up being cheaper over the period. People can't think in those simple terms anymore. Like I say, the buy side and the distribution side, it's literally, what's the cheapest I could get it through the door, get it out the door. No consideration anymore in terms of, at least not by anybody with any decency, put it that way. They don't look at the wider picture. So I know this an awful lot because this artificial market has caused, within the steel market, the artificial market was something that was causing a problem in reverse initially. All again with the full knowledge and assistance of WEF and the governments. And the reason for that was they wanted to weaken and force steel producers into financial difficulty. You had the cheap crap Chinese steel being subsidised by the Chinese government, by the CCP, so that they could overproduce and flood all of our markets with their cheap crap prices. And this is in a practice that's called dumping. The intention is to destroy the competition. And like I say, when you have the buy side and the distribution side playing usefully idiot, only caring about that purchase price, all they're interested in is going, oh look, we've got loads of cheap steel here, we can have a higher profit margin. So they're picking up all of this steel that's being dumped into the market. That then obviously means that the quality producers, the domestic market, their market share drops. They start to then struggle. And then, because they then start to struggle, and because it is a critical infrastructure, a critical industry, that's when they need to start saying that they need assistance from old daddy government, isn't it? That's when you start to see the interference coming in from the government side, intended all along. Because the first stages of response is that the government claims that they're going to clamp down on this kind of practice, and they're going to do that through tariffs. You put the tariffs in, that's so that there has to be the cost to be able to enter into the market, which means that that cheap subsidised price then looks more like the relative price of the domestic products. So it's going to be, at the very least, it should be competing on the base of quality, for which the Chinese crap would certainly fail. But when I was having to deal with a lot of these kind of problems, what I found was that across the UK and then the wider European Union as well, is that when they'd put in these, or they claimed that they'd put in these tariffs, I think at one point in that it was like 60% tariff. What it also then came with was a list of companies that would be exempt from those tariffs. And that list of companies just so happened to include every single Chinese company that was doing the dumping, including some that were coming in via Korea, which by default makes it pointless. The government then also, in their infinite wisdom, in order to further create problems for the domestic supply chain, then you've had the whole energy situation that has further increased the cost to produce in the domestic market via their artificial energy market. So then the domestic producers are squeezed even further. So their costs are rising, they're getting cheap crap coming in. You can't operate in a market like that. And both of these things are being done with the full intention and full knowledge of government, assisting Chinese shit products. But then, lo and behold, what does that mean? Well, it means that you get to be able to buy Sheffield Forge Masters for just 2.6 million, doesn't it? You get to shift from command and control to control of the means of production. See how that works? Strange, isn't it? Now, according to this particular government report from 2024, they literally did try to lie and blame supply as the problem. with zero mention at all of the very long standing complaint of dumping from China, enabled by the Uni Party, because obviously at this point in 2024 you've got Labour involved. No mention at all of the fact that the problems have come about through high energy costs as well, as if they've had nothing to do with this. This is just pure market forces. Wouldn't me, Gov. This ignorance is actually an admission of what anybody with a functioning brain should know. This kind of statement is only intended for complete and utter morons who know nothing and will simply just repeat the mantra fed to them, i.e. every retard in the media. This is the worst level of socialist lying. It's right up there with Mao. And where the biggest lie of all in this is this claim that industry itself is asking for the ability to be able to make the hydrogen-based low-quality steel. No, they're not. And government knows that. The only people that are claiming to be industry is the likes of that Mission Possible partnership, hence the World Economic Forum, because they're uneducated, low IQ deviants. So what we need to do here and that is get a bit of an understanding of the actual industry. And I've got a small map on the screen here that you can see above me, where, for any uninformed people, there's too many people that are uninformed. You might start to be able to at least get a bit of a comprehension of the different types of steel production. Now, Sheffield Forge Masters are apparently only one of two forges. I'm not entirely sure that the information here is 100% correct, but this is what I've come across. Because when I've been dealing with the steel side of things, and it's been within the wire rope, so not necessarily going into each and every element of the steel market myself. So, plus mine was foreign based as well. Not Chinese though. Anyway, there's only one of two forges, whereby, for anybody that doesn't understand, forging is the manipulation of steel to create large component parts. So not the same as actually producing the steel itself. Now, the steel production side of things in the UK, that's actually been sold off already to India and the CCP. So, different shades of the same socialist shite, really. But I mean, if we really wanted to go by dictionary definition terms into, in regard to the kind of ideology that we're looking at here, quite frankly, both India and the CCP would fit more into the fascism side of things. But that aside, the firms in the UK that are producing steel, like I say, Indian and CCP, is that you've got from the Indian side you've got Tata and Liberty, and then you've got British Steel. How they can keep that name is beyond me, which is owned by Jingye Group, CCP. That's a company that I covered not too long ago, because of their purchase of British Steel was based on the promise of them pushing this idiot hydrogen-based furnace, which they then reneged on because it's a stupid idea. Even the CCP understand that this is a stupid idea. Now, additionally, in terms of the wider context, we've got areas like rolling and processing, tubes, pipes, and then, like I say, the sector that I worked in, steel, wire, rope. Now, we can produce our own steel in this country because we can still mine iron, which is obviously the main element. And apparently the fourth most abundant element on Earth. It's always the fourth most abundant element, isn't it? It's always right up there with 72% of people. that aside. So in terms of a pure resource, it would be a farce to turn around and claim that we wouldn't, due to scarcity, we would not be able to produce steel. Of course we can. Now, under the sellout situation that we currently have, the production in the UK only equates to 5.6 million tonnes. But if we add a little bit more meat on the bones to this, the UK demand is 7.6 million tonnes. We're then also importing another 4.6 million tonnes, so presumably within some of the component parts maybe, or something along those lines, we're exporting 3 million tonnes in order for that to make any sense. Now, there is mention of these being the lowest levels since the Great Depression, and that's something that I can very much well believe. And the reason why I can certainly believe that, because from the Industrial Revolution, Britain was one of the key steel producers. That's why Mao wanted to replicate it. Well, in terms of the world now, we're right down the bottom here on that 36. And it keeps falling. This government policy of command and control may very well just destroy this sector, leaving only enough headspace for them to be able to stick to the thing that they have to have the best, the most rather, certainly not the best. They have to have some kind of a supply to be able to force their ideology. So they'll need a certain amount of the steel industry under control of production so they can create their military machine. Because divisionary war theory. It's what socialists always do. But this path of removing the crude supply and expecting embrittled steel, or effectively the recycled pig iron, to be a part of this supply chain, to have that supply chain then even further bastardized and integrity lost through yet another hydrogen process. That basically does mean that even their ambitions to at least keep a little bit for their military ideology, that will be so poorly equipped that the end product will more than likely in that would actually kill more people trying to operate the machinery than it would at any kind of attempt at trying to fight anyone. Anything that they try to produce and that, I mean, it'll literally just collapse, blow up, backfire. It will not be a military worth assault at all. It will not work. So then they might want to start to distract everybody by claiming, don't worry about it. If the steel industry is going, it's not important. We're going to have high-end industry in this country. Heard that quite a lot, haven't we? We don't have to worry about that manufacturing side and that we're handing over to China and India, because we're going to have the high-end stuff. We're going to have AI. The stuff that's the only thing that matters. We're going to have AI. Guess what that depends on? If you want to have an AI market, semiconductors, data centers, you can't do any of this without steel. And other metals as well, but you can't do it without steel. So, I mean, if you want AI, then if anything, you actually have to expand the production. You have to expand access to these resources. And you also have to reduce the cost of energy. Any sign of that happening? So they're even fucking up this high-end tech industry that they keep going on about as if it actually means anything. Except these people are so fucking retarded. Now, I could go along with some certain people and that and say, well, you know, this is all actually in that. This is all done as like a kind of a punishment for us having dared to vote for Brexit. But considering the wider EU is also falling within this complete, absolute basket case of this wider agenda, and this wider agenda, and that being particularly the one that's being pushed through the likes of the WEF and this Mission Possible partnership, the documentation for that level of stupidity goes back even before 2016. I can only assume, realistically, these idiots genuinely created these plans that are so unfathomably, just staggeringly stupid and thick that literally none of them understood what they were doing. Well, I mean, I know that they don't understand what they're doing, but they had such a false sense of superiority that they wanted to take over the entire bloody world with a one world government idea, and everybody's going to run industry the way that we see it, that how it worked out on the spreadsheet. They've invited in a whole bunch of people that have been able to go, how do we destroy the industry in order to be able to take control of the industry? And then we'll have utopia. Okay. The problem is all of this sort of stuff is actually unfolding before them. And I think even they can see that their lunacy is so open and obvious that it just doesn't work, and it is so utterly fucking stupid that they're actually having to double down on it. That's the problem. Once you've committed yourself to this level of stupid, it's then become a dogma, and it is so deep inset into their idiot heads, for whatever space there is in between their ears, they don't want to admit that they are stupid and how destructive it is. They have to constantly self-affirm that, oh no, we're the experts, we know, as everything around them falls to shit. So just as a reality check for them, if they do shift into full control of the means of production, there literally won't be anything left to control. And they can steal all the fake money as well, where at the last minute and that they can just pretend, you know, oh, there was nothing to do with me, and try to run away. Well, if they do that, they run away with their fake money. It just means that their dynasties will die as well, doesn't it? But everywhere else will continue. The utter pointlessness of this ridiculous agenda is actually something to behold. And what they're actually going to create is this blank space of nothing, and a very strong smell of defeat, where the enemy that defeated us would actually be us if we go along with this. So I'll have a little bit more to say on this in a short moment, but for the time being, here's the update with the financials, and obviously that because there's no input for the benchmark year, there's no change, so the acquisition of Sheffield Forge Masters doesn't really have any impact to this particular slide. The policy suggestion then, I've had to put into the miscellaneous section, and I've put it under sell the business. The aim of a policy should be to sell Sheffield Forge Masters, take it out to the MOD. But not quite that simple. Now, I have to explain what I'm talking about with the policy. I find this particular piece of data to be both a little bit odd and also encouraging at the same time. I understood a part of it already, but there's a claim here that there's 460 steel manufacturers in London, where the initial consideration, I know I've met a few of them, but to suggest the number of organisations in this country at these sorts of numbers, and especially being based in London, surely that's in name only. Well, for those that aren't properly aware of this, that wouldn't exactly be true in terms of believing that we don't really have much of an industry, even in places like London, because what you also have to understand is within the steel industry, you've got people like fabricators. And then you have to understand that pretty much any facility that has a CNC machine, then that's going to fit within this kind of marketplace. So, because this process that I'm doing is supposed to be based on what we could do rather than what is being done to us, I then have to move into discussing things whereby there are actually positives and why it is that we should be developing our own industrial strategy. I said the reason why I put policy suggestions in this process and in each episode is because we can do things to make things better. Now, the resources that they're seeking to control, doesn't matter how much they try to fuck them up, those resources will still be there. And like I say, it's just a matter of taking it out of their hands again. What that means is, when I say that I would sell Sheffield Forge Masters, I'm not talking about doing that immediately from the moment you walk through the door. I would firstly cancel that ridiculous hydrogen project, and I would focus on solving the energy problems first so that the cost of production can come down. I then look at withdrawing that 400 million of investment because, like I say, from an M&A perspective, it's retarded. What I would do is to have a conversation with the actual workforce themselves to find out what kind of improvements would actually be needed whilst maintaining a logical quality production line. Consider we're talking about an organisation that has this 100 million per year revenue. I can guarantee it certainly doesn't need 400 million of investment. And the thing to keep in mind with that as well is that they're on 100 million of revenue after being compromised by being hit from both sides. So the potential to be able to increase that revenue stream is very, very high. I'd ensure that their existing contracts would continue, whereby you have to keep in mind that just because you're looking towards removing it from the MOD, it doesn't mean to say that they lose their basis as a single source supplier. So that can be used as a source of persuasion. So when they are supplying companies like Babcock, for example, you can turn around and say, well, no, you are still going to buy from there. You make sure that the domestic market is being cared for. So once they're back on their feet and we can bring them back into profitability, then I would look at offloading them. Because like I say, you should not allow government to control the means of production. The sale itself would be under very strict conditions, which means there would absolutely be no ability for purchase beyond domestic buyer. No CCP buyers, no Indian buyers, no Qataris, nobody stays in this country. And this kind of thing is key to the kinds of strategies that we should be looking towards creating and then employing. Because I don't know if, I mean, I would imagine by now, and that is because it's gone around so much over the last couple of days. If you saw that absolute farce of a conversation between Tucker Carlson and Piers Morgan, my God, it was actually, it was quite a good example as to exactly who we shouldn't be listening to. Because these kinds of people, these kinds of conversations are exactly why we have a wider problem. Because just like those at the World Economic Forum, there are far too many people in those kind of positions that seem to think that they are experts or seem to think that they have valid opinions, but they really don't know much of anything at best. I say this World Economic Forum is just a bunch of hired hands. They're employees. They're CEOs that have failed upwards. They're backed up by academics that have never got their hands dirty and intentionally avoided the real world because that would mean accountability. These are people that make up the class that I really care the least about, which is the stakeholders. I don't care about these people. The only thing that the likes of this Tucker Morgan interview, that where it was a small part of the conversation, but it was something that did kind of resonate with me as being something as an area of potential legitimate discussion, not within anything that they would understand, but something that could be considered or should be considered, because they certainly weren't able to elucidate on it. And it was this reference again, because everything is always about World War II. And the question raised as to how it was that we were actually supposed to have been the one that won. We were supposed to be the country that won the war. Now, there is legitimacy to that argument, because they can claim that the US were also the winners of the war. But that's actually not because they actually won the war in terms of the actions that they did. It was because we paid them. Russia were also a nation that we can consider as winners. Again, not because they were the ones that actually won the war in overall, but because they took over land and resources as reward for them playing their role within the war. What the UK did, and the UK were the ones that won the war, We took nothing from those that we fought against. And we landed ourselves in a situation with an absolutely bombed out country and a massive debt. That's the truth of the matter. That's why we've had this problem since the end of World War II. The lessons that we do need to absolutely be learning from that is to consider what it was that we did for the likes of Germany and Japan, which was to allow them to rebuild unhindered. I'd focus more on the Japan side simply because Germany have learnt next to absolutely bloody nothing. And quite frankly, in that Germany became even worse since the Berlin Wall came down. But if you take the Japan side of things into account, and I'm sure I have mentioned this one before as well, but the answer is for us to create our own bubble economy. We have to be building off of the back of actual experts, which then goes back to my original opening point about the watchmaker tools. Because when you're building up your economy again, yep, your first point of call is to get the real core industries back to quality and making sure that that is the only source of produce for your market. But then you do what the Japanese did, which is they started looking around the world and going, well, which markets could we enter? Who is actually producing something where we can make it better and then take over? Hence the watchmaker situation. I say small market, but it's just an example. We do have a unique benefit in the fact that we do still have a lot of overseas territories, and those overseas territories are very much underutilised. We could look towards rebuilding our military, but on a very different basis. We rebuild the military for us. Anybody wants to use anything to do with our military, Europe wants to whine about Russia continuously. Okay, you want some assistance from us? It comes with an invoice. Simple as that. You don't get us for free ever again. And you certainly have like agreements to have the UK funding Germany's rearmament. Fuck no. If we're going to have a military, it is doing what it's supposed to do. It's there for our protection, nobody else's. Somebody wants to whine about Putin continuously. I don't care. I literally don't care. If Putin himself wants to play silly buggers because they keep having their ships coming into our waters, well, the answer to that is literally quite easy, really, because just remind them that we do have that mutually assured destruction capability. We can have conversations with certain nations that have been declared to be the enemy of the world despite having done bugger all. Just start it all from fresh. Get rid of all of our ideologues and the liars and the ones that want to create false wars and start again, but on the basis of don't fuck with this. We can cut out all these EU retards as well and all their lies. Not interested in their bullshit anymore. We can turn around and say, you know, anybody that wants to enter our waters, Do you have permission, yes or no? If you don't be surprised if you don't actually make it out of the waters. Really quite simple. So obviously I don't care about idiots like Piers Morgan, whose first response to being being questioned about the replacement taking place is, it's okay if I get my food, you fat prick. I mean, honestly, it's such a common response as to why you should allow every Tom, Dick and Harry to come into the country and have all of your industries completely fucking destroyed. My food. I don't care about your spices. Curry is slop shite. French food is all garlic slop. And honestly, I mean, if all you care about is, did somebody add some shit into my food so it doesn't taste like what was actually supposed to have been cooked in the first place, then you're not some great food connoisseur, you're a fucking idiot. It means that you can't cook. I need my food to taste like this spice. Well, eat this fucking spice then. Just eat the spice. You moron. Utter fucking stupidity. My food is nobody's priority. And I also do absolutely call bullshit on that lie as well of, oh, the British food in the 70s and 80s was awful. No, it wasn't. Fuck off. Anyway. If people are turning around and saying, right, as part of this industrial strategy that we need to be creating for the future, we need to have the technology. Okay, that's fine. So long as you still understand that you don't get it without the skill of real experts to provide the component parts. Your algorithm is not solving these things. My robot is not solving any of these things. Making the best component parts means that your industrial strategy demands that not only would you be looking towards producing quality products, that means that your industry would be reliable, cost effective over time. It also means that you've got the opportunity to be able to share that kind of vision and understanding with your workforce, so that the workforce can actually understand and give due respect as to what it is they're actually going to be creating. And then in turn, they'll give a lot more respect towards the products that they produce. I'm really desperately trying to avoid the word pride, because that comes before a fall. But you understand what I mean. If people are really looking towards the products that they produce and go, yeah, I did that. Look how long that lasts. Look at the craftsmanship that I've produced there. You get some sense of purpose there. It's not always about being paid idiot amounts of money. Your leftist ideology, I've worked at McDonald's for 5 minutes, therefore I should be the CEO. No, fuck off. Anybody that understands what happened with both Japan and Germany after the Second World War understood that they didn't manage to grow their industries back by having a bunch of overpaid whinge bags who then called in the union with their socialist retard ideology every 5 minutes so that they could disrupt everything, because they thought that they were worth more than they actually were. They didn't do that. You concentrate more on being realistic. Can you actually understand what is being produced? Can you be the one that will sit back and go, I did that? And then by default, at the same time, the owners of that business, same mindset. Don't take the piss. We don't have to return to a lot of the traditional way of doing things, but we can look towards creating a strategy that enables people to return to the spirit that many people cling to still. They don't actually produce it physically at the moment because they've got too many things that are beating them down. But you know that they're clinging to that. We know what we could do. We know what our ancestors did. And they know that they could do it again. When you do a job or something that the job is there to give you some skill, it's then it should be done in such a way that it then gives you some ambition to do better. And on a fundamental level, yes, of course, it's there to be able to help you to pay your way through life. Exactly what level that achieves, that's the whole point of your ambition. How far is that going to take you? Your life is then external to your work. And no, I'm not talking about work-life balance. That's bullshit as well. But if you need something to be able to sustain you outside of creating some kind of a vision for the nation and the industry, that's where your family comes in, because that's something that is within your direct field. You have your family, so that you've got somebody else that you care for as well. Helps you to develop your own responsibility and accountability. When you're then looking towards having something like that, it then means that when we do look towards this constant conversation around housing, your house once again then becomes your castle, not some equity on a balance sheet. Your house is your home. When you understand these three component parts, which can be considerations within an industrial strategy, then, and only then, will your country be also the land that you call home. And that nobody from outside will ever actually understand, and which is why they should not be allowed in hordes. You don't allow the horde of invasion into your home. I will have much more over proper, detailed industrial strategy at a later date. As I said, there's a lot of process to go into this. I could start producing something now, but if somebody wants me to produce that now, there's all of the information of where you can get in contact with me. I don't do shit for free. Not to that extent, anyway. But for the meantime, I'll be continuing to run through the process, and everything within the process will feed into an understanding as to what it is that is required. So what began as a bit of a simple observation moved into a discussion about issues, very real and distinct issues, with why our country is facing demise and how it's facing demise and who is responsible for that demise. Hopefully that last little bit there is enough for you to understand that rather than doing what so many other people are doing and just saying everything's going to hell in a handbasket, doing a Peter Hitchens and saying, oh, jump ship now, there are positive messages that can come through this. For all of the shit that they do, there is always, we know what to do when they've gone. Rome may have fallen, Italy still exists. May not particularly like it very much, but it still exists. And the foundations that we have, certainly something that should give us a little bit more hope than tends to be expressed in too many conversations these days. And so because of that, and a little bit of a more of an uplifting ending than I normally tend to do, that does then require a little bit of a special ending to the episode. So enjoy the ending part. See you next week. Bye bye.